These are some frequently asked questions about the last part of the California legislative session. What generally happens in the last part of the California legislative session? The final weeks of the session are a proverbial sprint to the finish line. Policy committees have generally finished the bulk of their work, but there are a handful of bills that get significant amendments that require policy committees to hear additional bills as the session winds down to a close. The main focus is now on the fiscal committees and their votes on measures that are pending on the respective suspense files in the appropriations committees of the Senate and the Assembly. The last 2 weeks of the session are a whirlwind as hundreds of bills are considered on the floor of the second house, with most bills having to return for a final floor vote in the bill's house of origin. Once session adjourns, the work is not done. Instead, the focus turns to the governor's office and the governor's consideration of, on average, 1,000 bills over the course of 1 month. What's the usual legislative calendar in the last part of the session? The Assembly Chief Clerk and the Senate Secretary prepare a calendar for the session with corresponding authority for these dates. Usually, in this last part of the session, there is the legislature reconvening from summer recess, last day for fiscal committees to meet and report bills to the floor session only so that no committees other than conference committees or rules committees may meet, last day to amend bills on the floor, last day for each house to pass bills, and at which point the interim study or the final recess begins upon adjournment, and then, of course, the last day for the governor to sign or veto bills passed by the legislature. What are the constitutional requirements in the last part of the California legislative session? A bill cannot be passed or become a statute unless that bill and any amendments have been in print and published on the internet for at least 72 hours before the vote, unless the governor has submitted a statement that the bill is needed to address a state of emergency. Also, no bill may be passed unless a majority of members of each house votes in favor of the bill. Also, each bill passed by the legislature must be presented to the governor. The bill becomes a statute if it's signed by the governor, or the governor may veto a bill if he or she returns it to the House of Origin along with any objections. And if the legislature votes again to pass the bill by a two-thirds vote, then the bill does become a statute. Any bill in the possession of the governor after adjournment of the legislature that's not returned within 30 days becomes a statute. Any other bill presented to the governor prior to the end of session becomes a statute if it's not returned within 12 days. Any bill that was introduced in the first year of the 2 year session that has not been passed by its House of Origin by January 31st of the second year may no longer be acted upon by either House. At the close of each regular session of the legislature, i.e., the 2 year session, the president pro tempore of the Senate, the Speaker of the Assembly, the Republican or minority leaders of the Assembly and Senate are required to report on the progress they made toward meeting the goals and objectives that they outline at the beginning of the 2 year legislative session. And finally, what are the statutory requirements in the last part of the session? The only one is that at each session, the governor must report to the legislature any reprieves, pardons, or commutations that were granted, including the reason for providing that reprieve, pardon, or commutation.